Welcome to Short Stories. I'm your host, Martin. Today we will hear an abridged version of a story called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by American author Washington Irving. Irving wrote many iconic American stories such as Rip Van Winkle and The Spectre Bridegroom. Many of his stories and essays can be found in his book, The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gentleman. You can check them out on Gutenberg.org. Before I tell you this spooky story, I will tell you the vocabulary and example sentences. After the story is complete, I will read 4 listening comprehension questions. No time to waste. Let's get started. Vocabulary: bizarre. Bizarre. Salvador Dali is famous for his bizarre paintings. Lanky. Lanky. She prefers to date lanky basketball players. Supernatural. Supernatural. Witches are experts in supernatural phenomena. Heir and heiress. Heir. Heiress. She is the heiress of the Hilton Hotel business. Stocky. Stocky. The best Olympic wrestlers are all stocky men. Full of one's self. Full of one's self. Don is very narcissistic and full of himself. Duke it out. Duke it out. The 2 boxers duked it out for over an hour. Topsy-turvy. Topsy-turvy. The kindergartners turned the classroom completely topsy-turvy. Crestfallen. Crestfallen. He felt crestfallen after receiving the bad news. Jerk. Jerk. Vlad is such a big jerk. I wish he would go away. The story. In the state of New York lies a quiet and isolated valley called Sleepy Hollow. At first glance, this place didn't look that special. Its few residents were descendants of the original Dutch settlers. They lived in modest houses and did honest work. The valley was so quiet, you could hear the gentle babbling of the brook no matter how far you were from it. The entire valley had a drowsy, dreamy atmosphere, but there was more to this place than met the eye. Every day at dusk, the whole valley became blanketed by an eerie fog. Sometimes it was so thick you couldn't see your own hands. This fog would last all night and dissipate in the sunlight. During these foggy nights, the local residents reported strange sightings and spooky sounds. It seemed like everyone there had a ghost story to tell. Some believed that the valley was cursed by a wizard, or that an ancient Indian shaman used to hold his meetings there because of its natural connection to the bizarre. Whatever the reason, Sleepy Hollow was certainly a special place. In the year 1790, a man from Connecticut arrived in Sleepy Hollow. His name was Ichabod Crane. He was a tall, lanky man with narrow shoulders, big ears, and a long nose. Some said that he looked like a scarecrow that had escaped its field. He came to Sleepy Hollow, he said, to establish a school for the instruction of the neighborhood children. He was strict but fair with his students. Because of this, he became popular with the local housewives, who thought that he was the smartest, handsomest man they had ever met. Ichabod enjoyed the company of the local women and would not decline an offer of tea. He loved to share gossip and was deeply interested in the supernatural. One day, while chatting with one of the old Dutch wives over a cup of tea, he asked, "What's the scariest thing you've seen in this valley?" The old woman said, "That's easy. It's the Headless Horseman." She explained that the Headless Horseman was the ghost of a Hessian soldier whose head had been blown off by a cannon during the Revolution. "I saw him once on the bridge that leads to the old Dutch cemetery," said the woman. "He kept his head on the saddle, its eyes shining in the darkness." She added with a dramatic intonation. Ichabod felt his hair stand on end. Later that same week, Ichabod agreed to teach a singing class at the chapel. Most of the young ladies of the town were happy to sign up to spend an evening singing with the charming schoolmaster. One of those young ladies was Katrina Van Tassel, the daughter and heiress of the wealthiest man in the valley. Ichabod was immediately smitten. He began courting her and visited her parents. Her family lived in the biggest house in Sleepy Hollow. Ichabod marveled at the abundant produce of the Van Tassel farm and the warm, cozy luxury of the living room. Ichabod was already imagining himself living in that house, eating roasted pork at Christmas next to a comfortable fire. He knew that he had to marry this woman, who was also very pretty and charming. Katrina attracted the attention of all the young men of Sleepy Hollow. One of those men was named Abraham Van Brunt, a.k.a. Brahm Bones. He was Ichabod's opposite. He was stocky, broad, and strong. He loved the outdoors and performing feats of strength. He was said to be the best horseman in the valley, which made him a little bit full of himself. But he did have his good qualities. He was brave and sometimes playful, often playing pranks on his friends. Before Ichabod had arrived, he was the most popular man in Sleepy Hollow. Brahm Bones did not like Ichabod, and he was certainly not going to let him woo the woman he intended to marry. He knew they couldn't simply duke it out because Ichabod was a lover, not a fighter. Instead, Brahm and his friends decided to drive the lanky schoolmaster away. They broke into his school and turned the place topsy-turvy. On Sunday, during singing practice, they stopped up the chimney and filled the whole chapel with smoke. Finally, Brahm taught his dog to sing and suggested to Katrina that she should switch teachers. "This dog sings more sweetly than Skin and Bones Ichabod," he claimed. The rivalry between Brahm and Ichabod continued all summer and well into the fall. At the end of October, the Van Tassel family held a harvest festival on their property. The whole valley was invited. Everyone ate, drank, and had a good time. Ichabod saw this event as an opportunity to make his move. He was going to propose to Katrina in front of the whole town. "That will shut up that stupid Brahm," thought Ichabod. The music started playing, and Ichabod asked Katrina to dance. Ichabod was very proud of his dance skills. Therefore, he wanted to use them to dazzle the lovely Katrina. After the dance was finished, Ichabod looked at her with his big green eyes, got down on one knee, and said, "Katrina, darling, will you marry me?" Katrina blushed and covered her mouth. For a few moments, she didn't know what to say. Finally, she said, "Oh, Ichabod, I'm so sorry, but I can't marry you just yet. I'm still young, and I have much to think about before I make such a big decision. You understand, don't you?" Ichabod was crestfallen. His plan had failed. He sighed and thanked Katrina for dancing with him. As he left the house, he could see Brahm's grinning face in the crowd. "That stupid jerk," thought Ichabod as he got his horse ready for the trip home. It was already night by the time Ichabod left the party. The fog had settled across the valley. As Ichabod's horse bumped its way down the lonely road, his thoughts constantly switched from anger to despair. Suddenly, he heard the sound of another horse. Ichabod turned around and saw a shadow of a horse and rider not far behind him. "Who's there?" asked Ichabod. He got no reply. Ichabod became annoyed and started on his way again, only to realize that the rider was following him. "Who are you?" he asked again. Still there was no answer. Ichabod started to feel uncomfortable. He remembered all of the ghost stories he had heard. As the rider approached Ichabod, he got a clearer view through the fog. Suddenly, Ichabod's hair stood on end. What he saw was as inexplicable as it was terrifying. The rider that was following him had no head. "The Headless Horseman!" gasped Ichabod. He kicked his horse and rode away as fast as he could. The ghostly horseman followed in hot pursuit. Ichabod rode faster, but he wasn't paying attention to where he was going. Before he knew it, he was in front of the bridge to the old Dutch cemetery. He yanked the reins to stop his horse from running across the rickety bridge. Ichabod looked back and saw how huge and black the figure was on the horse behind him. And hanging from the rider's saddle, Ichabod could see a round object bouncing. "It's the horseman's head," stuttered Ichabod to himself. He could see two glowing holes in the object. Ichabod was frozen with fear and watched as the grim rider lifted up the demonic-looking head. He turned to dodge the hideous missile, but he was too late. He felt a cold thud hit him in the back of his head. Ichabod fell face first into the dust, and everything went black. The next morning, Ichabod's horse was found in a field eating some grass. No one knew where Ichabod was. No sign of him could be found. People became worried. A search party was formed. They followed the trail of hoofprints to the old bridge. There they found Ichabod's hat next to some pieces of shattered pumpkin. "Where'd he go?" asked one man. "I bet the Headless Horseman got him," said another. After a while, the town moved on and hired a new schoolmaster. Brahm eventually married Katrina, and any time someone mentioned Ichabod and the bits of pumpkin, Brahm would always let out a hearty laugh. Listening comprehension questions. Number 1. Who was the scariest ghost in Sleepy Hollow? A. Ichabod Crane. B. Brahm Bones. C. Mr. Van Tassel. D. The Headless Horseman. Number 2. Why was Ichabod so eager to marry Katrina? A. She was beautiful. B. She was charming. C. She was rich. D. She was his cousin. Question 3. What was Ichabod's relationship with Brahm? A. They were best friends. B. They were romantic rivals. C. They were roommates. D. Brahm was his student. Question 4. What probably happened to Ichabod at the end of the story? A. He was killed by the Headless Horseman. B. He was killed by Brahm. C. He was turned into a pumpkin. D. He ran away out of fear.